Every day, you essentially pay your dues by doing the harder thing when it's the right thing to do.
Years ago, I used to do a little ethics talk at a gymnastics camp I worked at over the summer. And I found it really interesting because it was right when all of the scandals were going on, and I was doing like this little chat. It was only about 20 minutes, and I couldn't get any coaches to come to it. But then like immediately afterwards, somebody would do a tkatchev clinic, and it'd be like 30 coaches there. And I'd be like, guys, this is literally in the news. Like CNN's reporting on this. So it's something that we don't really want to talk about at times, but it's something that we have to talk about because I think we'll show as the podcast goes on later, this is more important than a tkatchev, and it's more important to your gym culture and your athlete's health than knowing proper techniques, teaching gymnastics. Like gymnastics is gymnastics, but a lot of these things are lives and people and what kind of life you're setting up for the future. It's like I taught them how to do a tkatchev well because I went to this clinic, but you didn't go to the clinic about how to interact with the athletes in maybe a healthier way than you had been in the past. But it's a confrontation with your emotions. You have to look at it and be honest with yourself and be like, why am I reacting this way? What is my thought process? You know, like, am I really thinking this through, or am I just upset? Like, am I angry about something going on? And then I'm having an emotional reaction to it. Am I sad? Am I insecure? And then you have to ask yourself, is this truly rational? Like, is this something that's helping me with what I'm doing? So like if you're coaching and you get really mad at your kids, you know, maybe you say something you didn't mean to them, or you kind of take it out on the guys or the girls. And you have to stop and take a second and be like, is this really the right thing? Am I thinking this through, or am I just having an emotional response? And I think we're all guilty of that. So it's not that you want to take away the emotions. Like the anger is there for a reason. You want to kind of understand why it's happening to you. And that's part of being a person. You know, like I'm going to have to deal with anger my entire life. So how can I deal with it in a way that's the most beneficial for me and the healthiest for me? An example is like, it doesn't make sense to cry because it's raining. Like if you're upset because the weather's bad, you have to ask yourself, well, is it the weather that's causing me to be upset, or is it my expectations of the weather? Like, is it the way I'm thinking about, I'm saying the weather shouldn't be this way and it is this way, and now I'm upset about it. Well, you're expecting the world to just conform to what you want the world to do. So who's making the mistake here? When I have new coaches that are starting to work with like boys that are like really young, I always tell them right at the beginning, it's much easier if you just expect them to not listen to you and expect them to just bounce around and be crazy and try to jump off things, because they're going to do it. And you can sit there and you can try to tell them, stop it. Or you can just be like, they're boys, they're going to do this stuff. You do have to settle them down and keep them under control, but it doesn't make sense to get upset. It doesn't make sense to be mad at them, because it's out of your control how they're going to act. Like you cannot force them to listen. You can't force them to not behave. But at the same time, like you do need them to do what you need them to do. So you can do it in a way where you're not mad at them. You're not upset with them. You're just trying to get them to do what their parents are paying you to do, like trying to get them to learn gymnastics, or just in some cases, just stay on the event they're supposed to be on. And it's kind of there where I think stoicism comes into the gymnastics world a lot, is you're dealing with the same situation, but you're dealing with it emotionally from a different perspective, right? Like I'm not mad at the kids because they're not listening to me. I'm not upset with them. I expect them to not listen to me, or I expect them to make mistakes, I think would be better to say. And when they make a mistake, it doesn't frustrate me because I'm expecting them to do it. And it's fine that they do it, because if I'm going to work with little kids, I have to expect them to make mistakes. It doesn't make any sense for me to expect them to be little perfect robots when they come into the gym, because if they were little perfect robots, like what am I doing there? I don't have to be here. Like they're fine. They're going to do everything they're supposed to. No, they're not. And that's why I'm here. So if the kids are goofing off or misbehaving, I have to find a way to get them to do what they need to do. But I don't have to be upset about it. Like it's not going to make me angry, and I don't have to get frustrated and yell at them,
Mm.
which is a mistake I see a lot of coaches make. And it does frustrate people. And it also makes me a little upset for some of the coaches, because like, you don't really want to live in that environment. Like that. You don't want to go to work and just be angry every day, because what you said, you're not your thoughts. And what will happen, and you'll find this in the Stoics, is they'll say that, something bad will happen to you, and it's bad, it's tragic, it's hard to live through that moment, but then you'll relive it 1,000 times over and over and over again. You're not reliving the action, you're not reliving the thing, you're reliving it in your brain, right? Like you're thinking it and making it happen to you over and over again. And one of the things that CBT will try to do is try to get you to recognize the fact that it's over, it's past, you're in the present right now, but you're bringing all of this baggage with you, and your mind is going to a place that's causing you discomfort. And it's recognizing that your own thoughts are what's creating the feeling of unhappiness right now. And that's why you're frustrated, or that's why you're angry, is because you're dwelling on something that makes you frustrated and unhappy. And in this particular moment, there's really no reason to think that way. Like, kind of going back to the emotion things. And I do want to preface that I'm not a therapist, so like I don't have a tremendous amount of knowledge with CBT. So I'm going to kind of keep it where I know, which is I know Stoic philosophy really well. But like, going back to the emotions, in the moment when it happens, there's nothing wrong with being sad when something bad happens to you. There's nothing wrong with being mad in the moment, right? Like the Stoics would say that madness is like, or anger is temporary insanity. Like you're not thinking rationally in that moment, but it's like, it's going to happen. There's going to be things that make you angry. And if you get upset with yourself for feeling an emotion, well, you're being irrational again, because now you're upset that you're upset, right? And you just create a loop. And recognizing those loops is part of the process of helping your mind kind of be a little bit less toxic to yourself. Talked about, but I wanted to talk a little bit about the ACE study, which had come out in 98. It's called the Adverse Childhood Experience. And essentially,
I'll pull it up while you're talking.
Essentially, it was a 1 to 10 scale of category of harm that a child would have experienced when they're younger. There've been a lot of work done on it. The original one, they just asked you a question like, have you ever experienced this? Did you ever experience this? And I won't go into super detail about what the questions are, but they're all different forms of trauma that you might have experienced as a child. And what they found from the study was that if you had 4 or more ACEs, which is if you scored 4 or higher on the 10-point scale, you had a 4 to 12-fold increase in health risks of alcoholism, drug abuse, depression, or suicide attempts. And the most shocking point was you had a 1.5 or 1.4 to 1.6-fold increase with heart disease, cancer, chronic lung disease, liver disease, and various other forms of physical ailments. I discovered the ACE study a little bit through chatting with friends of mine. I think Safe Sport might have covered it in the last course that they had us do. And then I just dove into it and just started listening to like every lecture I could find about it, because I found it really, really interesting. And I know when we were talking about it earlier, we both agreed. I think it's probably the most important study that's come out for anybody who's going to work with children ever, probably. Like if you're coaching or a teacher, or you interact with kids, really with anything, like you need to be aware of this study, because it's changing our perceptions about the way we interact with kids and the way trauma happens. Because one of the things that's on the list, one of the ACEs, is emotional harm. And repeated emotional harm, we're now seeing evidence that it can cause physical harm, which isn't to say that if you yell at your athlete, they're going to develop cancer. Like, that's ridiculous. But if you put your athlete in an environment where they're constantly under stress because they're afraid they're going to get yelled at, or they feel like they're not good enough, or they feel humiliated, then you're at least giving them one notch on the 10-point scale. You don't get to decide what kind of environment you're in, right? Like, you don't get to decide how the other coaches interact with the kids. You don't get to decide what your gym environment is like. You're not in control of that. The only thing you're in control of is what you do when you're in the situation. So when we talk about the emotional side of it, this is going to feel really bad. You're not going to have an easy time dealing with it. If you decide to put yourself out there and you decide to put your foot down, you are going to feel like shit the whole time. And that's where, when I talk about the Stoics, comes in, because that is part of the challenge of life, is the emotional side of doing the right thing. I want to dispel the myth that people report for attention or they do it to make themselves look good. I don't think that's ever the case, because you're not going to get a pat on the back and like a handshake. And they're like, thank you for finally standing up. Most of the time, you're not going to get the closure that you think you want or you think you deserve, right? Like, there's not going to be a congratulations at the end of it. It's going to be a long, crappy process, and you probably won't see the benefits from it immediately. But what you won't see is the harm that's going to continue if you don't do it and if you don't step in. And I think it's hard for people sometimes to visualize that by me not doing something and me not stepping in, I'm going to help create the harm that could affect somebody for the rest of their lives.